The dark vastness of space stretched endlessly around Research Station Horizon, its metal walls humming with the quiet rhythm of life support systems. Tom Reed stood at the main viewing window, his reflection ghostly against the backdrop of stars. The message from Earth Command still glowed on his tablet, its contents making his heart race with excitement rather than fear. "You can't be serious about accepting this mission," said Bill, the station's security chief. He paced behind Tom, his heavy boots echoing in the otherwise empty observation deck. 3 research teams dead. 3. And those were some of the most advanced species in the Galactic Council. Tom turned away from the window, a slight smile playing on his lips. "That's exactly why we should go. Everyone's approaching this wrong." The tablet displayed images of the planet below, a world of deep forests and sweeping plains under twin moons. But it wasn't the planet's beauty that had caught Earth Command's attention. It was the creatures that ruled its wilderness. The Shadow Claws. "Look at this footage," Tom said, pulling up a holographic video. A massive creature moved through the forest with impossible grace for its size. Its 6 limbs rippled with muscle under armor-like scales that seemed to shift colors with each movement. 2 pairs of eyes glowed in its angular head, and curved claws longer than a human arm gleamed in the planet's dim light. Bill shuddered. The last research team lasted exactly 6 hours after landing. The ones before that didn't even make it to their base camp. Tom rewound the footage, focusing on a specific moment. "See how it's moving. Everyone thinks they're just killing machines, but look, it's testing the ground before each step. It's thinking, planning." "That's what makes them dangerous," Bill argued. "They're smart enough to hunt us." The station's AI chimed in through the speakers. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council. A holographic screen appeared before them, showing a stern-faced alien official. Its translucent skin pulsed with colors that the translation software identified as indicating extreme concern. "Research Station Horizon," the official began, "we must formally protest your planet's decision to send another team to study World 2547. The Shadowclaw species has been classified as Class X dangerous. No further research attempts will be authorized." Tom stepped forward. "With respect, Council member, Earth has already received exclusive research rights to the planet. Your protest is noted, but our mission will proceed as planned." The official's skin flashed deep red. "Your species' arrogance will lead to more deaths. The Shadowclaws cannot be studied. They cannot be understood. They can only be avoided." After the transmission ended, Bill threw up his hands. "Even the Council thinks this is suicide. What makes you think you can succeed where everyone else died?" Tom walked to his desk and picked up an old, worn book, an actual paper book, a rarity in this age. "You know I spent 10 years studying Earth's apex predators, right? Bears, tigers, wolves. Everyone thought I was crazy then too." He opened the book, showing pages of hand-drawn sketches and notes. "But I learned something important. The more defensive equipment you bring, the more likely you are to need it." "That doesn't make any sense," Bill protested. "Predators can sense fear," Tom explained, closing the book carefully. "They can sense when you're preparing to fight them. And the Shadowclaws, from what little we know, they're smarter than any predator Earth ever produced. We keep approaching them like they're monsters to be guarded against. What if we tried something different?" The station's AI interrupted again. "Supply ship approaching. Loading of research equipment will begin in 30 minutes." Tom nodded, gathering his tablet and book. "I'm going down with minimal gear. No weapons, no force fields, just observation equipment and basic supplies." Bill grabbed his arm. "That's not just crazy, it's against protocol. You need to at least take basic defensive equipment." "The protocol is what got 3 teams killed," Tom said firmly, gently removing Bill's hand. "Trust me on this. Sometimes the best defense is to show you don't need one." As Tom walked toward the supply dock, Bill called after him. "The Shadowclaws won't care about your theories. They'll just see food. Tom didn't turn around, but he smiled. Maybe, he said, or maybe they'll see something they've never seen before, someone who isn't afraid of them. The stars continued their eternal dance outside the station's windows as Tom prepared for a mission that would either revolutionize human understanding of alien life or add his name to the growing list of the Shadowclaw's victims. Either way, he knew there was no turning back now. The small research pod touched down softly in a clearing as the planet's twin moons cast long shadows through the alien trees. Tom Reed stepped out into the humid air, carrying only a basic survival pack and his observation equipment. No weapons, no force fields, no armor, just like he planned. Final warning, crackled Bill's voice through his communicator. Our sensors show Shadowclaw activity less than 2 kilometers from your position. You can still abort, and we'll pick you up. Tom switched off the communicator and smiled. 2 kilometers was perfect, close enough to observe, but not so close as to seem threatening. He quickly set up his small camp, nothing more than a simple shelter and some monitoring devices. As night fell, the forest came alive with strange sounds. Glowing insects danced between the trees, and somewhere in the darkness, something big moved. Tom sat quietly, making notes in his old paper book as his cameras recorded everything. Movement patterns suggest a hunting group of 4, he wrote. They're coordinating their positions, but not like Earth pack hunters. More like they're sharing a single mind. A deep rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The planet was known for its sudden, violent storms, and this one looked particularly nasty. Tom secured his equipment just as the rain began to fall in heavy sheets. That's when he heard it, a different sound cutting through the storm, a high-pitched call that made the hair on his neck stand up. It wasn't an adult Shadowclaw's roar. It was something else. Against every safety protocol, Tom grabbed a light and ventured out into the storm. The call came again, closer this time. He pushed through the wet undergrowth until he found its source. A young Shadowclaw, smaller than the adults but still larger than Tom, had become trapped in a mudslide. One of its 6 legs was caught between fallen trees, and the rising water threatened to drown it. The creature's scales shifted between colors of distress, deep reds and blacks that Tom's research suggested indicated fear. "Easy there," Tom said softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone might help. "I'm not going to hurt you." The young Shadowclaw's 4 eyes fixed on him, its head crest rising in a threat display. But it didn't snap at him. Instead, it made that high-pitched call again. Tom knew what was coming. That call would bring adult Shadowclaws running. He had maybe minutes to make a decision. Retreat to safety, or help the creature and risk being torn apart when its parents arrived. He stepped forward. Using his survival pack's rope and his knowledge of leverage, Tom carefully created a pulley system around the fallen trees. The young Shadowclaw watched him work, its color shifting to curious blues and greens. Almost there, Tom grunted as he pulled on the rope. The trees shifted just enough. The young Shadowclaw pulled its leg free and scrambled up the muddy bank. But instead of running away, it turned to face Tom. That's when the adults arrived. 3 massive Shadowclaws burst from the forest, their scales blazing with aggressive reds. Tom stood his ground. Though every instinct screamed at him to run, he kept his movements slow and deliberate as he packed up his rope. The largest Shadowclaw, easily 4 times Tom's size, stepped forward. Its claws could have cut him in half with a single swipe, but something strange happened. The young one moved between them, its scales rippling with complex patterns. The adult's colors shifted. The aggressive reds faded to curious blues and greens, matching the young one's pattern. They were communicating, Tom realized, not just with sounds or movements, but with their very colors. The large Shadowclaw turned its 4 eyes to Tom. It stepped closer, lowering its massive head to his level. Tom remained still, his heart pounding but his face calm. Slowly, carefully, the creature's scales shifted to match the peaceful blue-green pattern. In that moment, as the storm raged around them, Tom knew he had been right. The shadow claws weren't mindless killers. They were intelligent, social beings, and he had just witnessed something no other researcher had lived to document: their capacity for curiosity and perhaps even gratitude. The group disappeared into the forest as quickly as they had come, leaving Tom standing in the rain with a smile on his face. He pulled out his waterproof notebook and wrote, "First contact successful. They don't want our fear. They want our understanding." 3 weeks had passed since the storm, and Tom's research station looked very different now. Gone were the security barriers other teams had considered essential. Gone was the heavy equipment. Instead, his camp blended naturally with the forest, open to the elements and to the curious eyes that watched from the shadows. "You did what?" Bill's voice crackled through the communicator with alarm. "Tom, tell me you didn't just say you dismantled the perimeter sensors." Tom watched as a group of shadow claws moved through their morning hunting ritual about 50 meters from his camp. Their scales rippled with gorgeous patterns of gold and amber in the early sunlight. "The sensors were making them nervous," Tom explained, making notes in his book. "They can feel the electromagnetic pulses. It's like, imagine someone constantly pointing a weapon at you while trying to have a conversation." "That's exactly what those sensors were supposed to do," Bill shouted. "Keep them away." "But I don't want to keep them away," Tom said, smiling as he watched the youngest shadow claw, the one he'd helped in the storm, attempt to copy the hunting moves of its parent. "I want to understand them." He had learned more in 3 weeks than all previous research teams combined. The shadow claws weren't just pack hunters. They were a complex society. Their color-changing scales weren't just for camouflage. They were a sophisticated language. Tom flipped through his notebook, now filled with detailed drawings of their color patterns. Bright red with black stripes, danger warning. Deep blue with gold spots, safe hunting grounds. Green ripples, curiosity or learning. Purple waves, family bonding. He wrote as he observed the morning hunt. The young shadow claw spotted him and broke away from the group. Its scales shifted to that now familiar pattern of green ripples as it approached the camp. Tom had started calling it Little Storm in his notes, though he knew better than to think of it as a pet. "Tom," Bill's voice was serious now. "The Galactic Council is sending an inspection team. They say you're violating every safety protocol in the book." "The protocols are wrong," Tom said, watching as Little Storm demonstrated a hunting pounce nearby, its scales showing the teaching pattern he'd come to recognize: a request for feedback. "We've been treating them like monsters, so they treated us like threats." He stood slowly and mimicked the pounce, making Little Storm's scales flash with excitement. The adult shadow claws watched from the tree line, their own scales showing complex patterns Tom was still learning to read. "Look at this data," Tom continued, sending files back to the station. "Their color patterns show mathematical precision. There's recursion in their hunting formations. They're not just intelligent. They might be more advanced than us in some ways." A deep rumble from the forest made Tom turn. The largest shadow claw, the one he suspected was the pack leader, was approaching. Its scales shifted through a series of patterns Tom had never seen before. "Got to go, Bill," Tom said quickly. "Something new is happening." "Tom, wait." Bill's voice cut off as Tom switched off the communicator. The pack leader stopped a few meters away, its massive form towering over Tom. Then, slowly, deliberately, it began to change colors in a pattern Tom recognized from his own recordings. It was mimicking the warning patterns from his first day on the planet. "You're trying to tell me something," Tom whispered, quickly sketching the pattern. "About the day we met." The shadow claw's scales shifted again, showing the storm, the rescue, and then something new. A pattern that spread across its entire body like a flowing map. Tom's eyes widened as he understood. "You're not just showing me what happened. You're showing me why you let me live." The pattern was the same one Little Storm had shown the adults that night, but now Tom could see its full complexity. "You recognize that I chose to help instead of run," he said softly. "You knew from that moment that everything you'd been taught about humans was wrong, just like everything we've been taught about you was wrong." The pack leader's scales shifted to a deep, peaceful blue as it lowered its head to Tom's level. For the first time, Tom reached out and gently touched its armored scales. They were warm, alive with subtle vibrations that he realized were yet another form of communication. In his notebook, Tom wrote, "Breakthrough. Shadow claws don't just communicate with color. They think in color. Every pattern is a thought, a story, a connection. We've been trying to study them through barriers, but they've been trying to show us entire worlds." Dawn broke over the alien forest as Tom sat cross-legged on a fallen tree, watching Little Storm practice hunting moves. The young Shadowclaw had grown noticeably in the past month, its movements becoming more graceful, its color patterns more complex. The pack leader, whom Tom now called Guardian, rested nearby, its scales shifting in gentle waves of blue and gold as it watched them both. "Remarkable progress today," Tom spoke into his recorder. "Little Storm has mastered the third hunting sequence. More importantly, the pack is now including me in their daily routines. They're treating me not as an observer, but as a pack member." A soft chirping sound made Tom look up. Little Storm had caught something. A large, six-legged creature that looked like a cross between a deer and a lizard. Instead of eating it immediately, the young Shadowclaw dragged its prize over to Tom. "Are you sharing your hunt with me?" Tom asked, amazed. This was new behavior. Little Storm's scales rippled with proud greens and golds, dropping the catch at Tom's feet. Guardian's scales showed a pattern Tom had learned meant approval. Tom's communicator buzzed, breaking the moment. He checked the message and frowned. "Tom," Bill's voice was urgent. "The Galactic Council inspection team will arrive tomorrow. But there's something else. We've detected an unauthorized ship entering the system. It's not Council registered." Guardian's scales shifted to alert patterns, sharp reds and blacks. The massive creature could sense Tom's tension. "What kind of ship?" Tom asked, already suspecting the answer. "Looks like private researchers, the kind that don't care about permits or protocols." "Tom, you need to get out of there. These people, they're not like you. They won't try to understand the Shadowclaws." Tom looked at Little Storm, still proudly displaying its hunting colors, then at Guardian, whose scales now showed complex patterns of concern. Over the past month, he'd learned to read their color language almost as well as spoken words. "I'm not leaving," Tom said firmly. "This is exactly why I need to stay. The pack trusts me now. If these researchers come in with weapons and cages..." A deep rumble came from Guardian. The great creature rose to its full height, scales shifting through patterns Tom had never seen before. Other Shadowclaws emerged from the forest, gathering around them. "Bill, I need to go," Tom said quickly. "The pack is trying to tell me something important." He switched off the communicator and focused on Guardian's color display. The patterns were complex, telling a story in living light. Tom saw images of past hunts, of pack members working together, of threats faced and overcome. "You're showing me how the pack protects its own," Tom realized aloud. Guardian's scales shifted to show agreement, then changed to a new pattern, one that included Tom himself, represented in the colors the pack used for family. Emotion tightened Tom's throat. "You're not just letting me study you," he whispered. "You're making me part of the pack." Little Storm bounced excitedly, its scales matching the family pattern. The other Shadowclaws moved closer, their combined colors creating a stunning display of acceptance and unity. Tom reached for his notebook with shaking hands. Day 47. "I finally understand. The previous research teams failed because they tried to study the Shadowclaws as subjects, but you can't understand them from the outside. They're empaths. They don't just share food and territory. They share themselves. Their color language isn't just communication, it's communion." Guardian lowered its massive head to Tom's level, scales shifting to show a pattern of shared purpose. Tom understood the message clearly. Whatever came next, they would face it together. He wrote one final note. The Galactic Council called the Shadow Claws the galaxy's most lethal predators. They were wrong. The Shadow Claws aren't lethal because they're cruel or aggressive. They're lethal because they protect their own with absolute dedication. And now, somehow, this human has become one of their own. Little Storm nudged the forgotten prey animal with its snout, scales showing a pattern of gentle insistence. Tom smiled and reached for his cooking tools. It was time to share a meal with his new family. The rival research ship landed at dawn, its engine scaring birds from the trees. Tom watched from the forest's edge as 5 figures emerge, wearing heavy armor and carrying large weapons. Guardian stood beside him, its scales rippling with warning colors that spread to the rest of the pack. Those aren't research tools, Tom muttered, looking through his binoculars. Those are captured nets and stun cannons. His communicator crackled. Tom. Bill's voice was frantic. The council inspection team is still 6 hours out. Those people down there, they're from Red Star Research. They're known for capturing rare species for private collectors. Little Storm pressed close to Tom's side, its scales showing fear patterns he'd never seen before. The young Shadowclaw could sense the hostile intent of the newcomers. They're heading straight for the pack's hunting grounds, Tom said, watching the armed group move through the forest. They must have been monitoring my research transmissions. The leader of the rival team spoke loudly as they walked. Spread out. The research logs show the pack stays in this area. Remember, take the young one first. The adults will be easier to control if we have it. Tom's blood ran cold. They were after Little Storm. Guardian's scales flashed dangerous reds and blacks, but Tom placed a hand on its warm scales. Wait, he whispered. They have weapons that can hurt you. Let me try something first. He stepped out of the forest, hands raised. This is a protected research stone, he called out. You need to leave immediately. The rival team turned, weapons raised. Their leader, a tall woman with cold eyes, smiled without warmth. Ah, the famous Tom Reed, the man who befriended the galaxy's deadliest predators. She laughed. Do you know how much collectors will pay for a live Shadowclaw? Especially a young one that's been socialized. They're not specimens to be collected, Tom said firmly. They're intelligent beings, if you just take time to observe. We've observed enough. She cut him off. We've watched you prove they can be approached. Now we'll prove they can be captured. She raised her weapon. Step aside. Reed. This doesn't have to involve you. Tom held his ground. I won't let you do this. Security override code Delta 7. She spoke into a device. Suddenly, Tom's communicator went dead. There. No calling for help. Last chance to walk away. Behind Tom, the pack was moving. He could feel their presence, sense their rage building. But he also knew their patterns. They would protect their own. And now that included him. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Tom tried one last time. The only reason they haven't killed us all is because they know I trust them. If you attack now, a high-pitched whine filled the air as the rival team charged their weapons. Take him down, the leader ordered. Then get the young one. Time seemed to slow. Tom saw the leader's finger tighten on the trigger. He saw Little Storm's scales flash with protective colors. He saw Guardian's massive form beginning to move. In that split second, Tom made his choice. Instead of diving for cover, he stepped forward, placing himself directly between the weapons in his pack. If you want them, he said clearly, you'll have to kill me first. The forest went deadly quiet. The rival team's weapons hummed with deadly energy. Behind Tom, the pack's scales shifted through complex patterns of surprise, understanding, and decision. Then Guardian did something unprecedented. The massive Shadowclaw stepped forward, placing itself beside Tom, not behind him. Its scales shifted to show a new pattern, one that combined the colors of protection with the colors of family. One by one, the other Shadow Claws emerged, forming a line with Tom and Guardian. Little Storm took its place on Tom's other side, scales bright with courage. The rival team's leader took a step back, her confidence wavering as she faced not a human defending animals, but a united pack protecting its own. "What are you waiting for?" she shouted to her team. "Fire." But as her fingers squeezed the trigger, the forest exploded into chaos. And not from their weapons. The forest erupted with movement as more Shadow Claws emerged from every direction. Their scales blazed with patterns Tom had never seen before, complex swirls of color that seemed to pulse through the entire pack like a single living light show. The rival team's weapons suddenly sparked and died in their hands. "What's happening?" the leader screamed, shaking her useless stun cannon. "Why aren't they working?" Tom felt it then, a gentle pressure in his mind, like a soft whisper in a language he almost understood. Guardian's scales pulsed with rhythmic patterns, and somehow Tom knew what was happening. "It's their colors," he said in awe. "They're not just for communication. They're electromagnetic pulses. The patterns, they're creating interference fields." The rival team backed into a tight circle as more Shadow Claws appeared, their combined color patterns growing stronger. Little Storm pressed against Tom's side, its scales joining the synchronized display. "Impossible," the rival leader gasped. "They're just animals." "No," Tom said, finally understanding. "There's so much more. Those defensive technologies that the other research teams used, the ones that always led to attacks, they weren't triggering the Shadow Claws' aggression. They were blocking their ability to communicate." The pressure in his mind grew stronger, and Tom saw images, memories that weren't his own. He saw the previous research teams through the Shadow Claws' eyes, their electronic barriers creating painful static in the pack's mental link. He felt their confusion, their fear, their desperate attempts to reach out only to be met with walls of hostile technology. "Their color patterns aren't just visual," Tom explained, his voice filled with wonder. "They're part of a telepathic network. The entire pack thinks and feels as one." And now, he looked at Guardian in amazement. "Now they're letting me feel it too." The rival leader raised a backup weapon, smaller but still deadly. "This is ridiculous. They're valuable specimens, nothing more." But as she aimed at Little Storm, something extraordinary happened. Tom's mind filled with colors he couldn't see with his eyes, emotions and thoughts from the pack flowing into him like a river of light. Without thinking, his hand moved in perfect synchronization with Guardian scales, making a gesture that rippled through the electromagnetic field around them. The leader's backup weapon crumbled to dust in her hands. "What did you do?" she whispered, fear replacing her arrogance. "I didn't do anything," Tom said truthfully. "We did it. The pack did it. Their colors aren't just for show. They can manipulate energy at a quantum level. They've been trying to show us this all along, but our technology kept getting in the way." Little Storm's scales rippled with joy as Tom finally understood, the young Shadow Claw's happiness echoing in his mind like cheerful music. The other pack members moved closer, their combined patterns creating a protective circle around both Tom and the now defenseless rival team. Guardian's scales shifted to show a new pattern, one that Tom not only saw but felt in his mind. It was a pattern of choice. "They're giving you a choice," Tom translated for the terrified researchers. "Leave now, without your weapons, without your samples, without ever coming back." Or, he didn't need to finish the threat. The rival team could feel it too, the immense power humming through the air around them. "This is bigger than any of us realized," Tom continued. "The Shadow Claws aren't just predators who learn to think. They're a telepathic species that evolved perfect camouflage to protect their true nature. Their hunting isn't just for food. It's how they defend their secret." The rival leader looked at her team, then at the wall of shifting colors surrounding them. Slowly, she raised her hands in surrender. "We're leaving," she said quietly. "We're leaving right now." As the rival team retreated, Tom felt Guardian's approval flow through his mind. The pack's colors shifted to calmer patterns, but they maintained their protective circle. Through their shared connection, Tom understood. He hadn't just earned their trust, he had become part of their consciousness. In his mind, he felt Little Storm's playful question. Now that the barriers were gone, what else could they learn from each other? 6 months later, the research station horizon looked very different. The stark metal walls now rippled with living color as shadow claws moved freely through its corridors, their scales creating beautiful patterns that danced across the surfaces. In the main observation deck, Tom stood before the Galactic Council's virtual assembly, with Guardian and Little Storm by his side. "As you can see," Tom said, gesturing to the latest research data floating in holographic displays, "the Shadow Claws represent a civilization far more advanced than we initially understood. Their biological technology surpasses anything we've achieved." The council members' expressions ranged from amazement to disbelief as they watched recordings of Shadow Claws manipulating energy fields with their color patterns. Little Storm, now nearly adult-sized, demonstrated by changing the lighting in the room with a simple shift of its scales. "But how did you succeed where everyone else failed?" one council member asked. "Why did they choose to reveal themselves to you?" Tom smiled, feeling the warm pulse of Guardian's thoughts in his mind. "Because I chose to be vulnerable," he explained. "Every other research team tried to protect themselves with barriers and weapons, but those barriers were exactly what prevented real contact." Through their shared mental link, Guardian began projecting images. Tom had learned to translate these shared thoughts into words that others could understand. "The Shadow Claws evolved their abilities to protect themselves from ancient predators," Tom continued. "Their telepathic network let them coordinate perfectly, while their color patterns could disrupt any threat. But over time, they developed something far more precious, a shared consciousness that lets them experience life as one united being." Little Storm playfully projected a memory of their first meeting during the storm, the images visible to everyone through the holographic displays. The council members watched in fascination as the scene played out from the Shadow Claw's perspective, complete with the complex emotional resonance they had felt. "We've had to revise every assumption we made about them," Tom said. "They're not just predators who hunt for food. They're scientists, philosophers, and artists who hunt to maintain their ancient skills. Their color patterns aren't just communication. They're a form of art and technology combined." As if to demonstrate, the Shadow Claws in the station synchronized their patterns, creating a breathtaking display that transformed the entire room into a living canvas of light and emotion. Several council members gasped as they felt the edges of the telepathic broadcast. "The research station has become the first joint human Shadow Claw Institute of Learning," Tom explained. "They're teaching us about their bioenergy technology, while we're teaching them about the galaxy beyond their world. But more importantly, they're teaching us a new way of thinking about intelligence and civilization." Guardian projected images of other research teams now working with the pack, all of them learning to open their minds to the shared consciousness. Little Storm showed scenes of young Shadow Claws playing with human children, their minds linking in ways that crossed the boundaries of species. "Humanity's greatest strength," Tom said, his voice filled with pride, "isn't our technology or our determination. It's our ability to reach out, to make connections where others see only barriers. We succeeded not by trying to study the galaxy's most lethal predators, but by being willing to become their friends." The council voted unanimously to reclassify the Shadow Claws as a Class A advanced civilization, with full rights and protections under galactic law. But Tom knew that wasn't the most important victory. Later that evening, he sat in the observation deck with his pack, watching the twin moons rise over their world. Little Storm rested its head near him, sharing memories of their journey together. Guardian's scales shifted in the pattern that Tom had come to recognize as contentment. Through their shared connection, Tom felt the pack's collective thought. They had all evolved. The Shadow Claws had learned to trust, while humans had learned to truly connect. Together, They had discovered something greater than either species could have achieved alone. So, Tom thought back to them, feeling their collective amusement at his question, "What shall we discover next?" The pack's response came in a wave of colored light and shared emotion. The future was as limitless as the stars above them, and they would explore it together, not as different species, but as one family under the infinite sky.